turning on. This isn't working. Try and fix it for them. And they're kind of like, well, how old are you? And 12, 13, taking this thing apart. So they sort of had some experiences where people were kind of like, okay, I am now old. And they're only like 25, 30, but that generation gap of non-PC to PC, I was sort of riding that, surfing that wave coming in to land.
That reminds me of all my early struggles with trying to get credibility with people for being young. Now I wish I could go back being like old, but yeah, that was always a struggle. Like even with the computer stores, I'm like 21 trying to do this thing and look like I'm 16, and or even way back to my dad's gas station. Like he had me working there pretty young, and people wouldn't let me put gas in their car because they thought that, whatever, I'd blind myself because I was like 12 and trying to pump gas.
A lot of people that I dealt with sort of kind of gave me the hairy eyeball at the start, because they're of course older, so therefore they must know how to do all these sorts of things. So when a kid does it, it sort of took them to a moment to come to the appreciation that, okay, they don't have to do that. There's people that can do this. And then sort of there was the appreciation there, and taught a couple people how to maintain their own systems afterwards. To this day, they still, will turn around and thank me or joke about that thing.
It doesn't help that you're jury-rigging machines to give you extra tickets when you're out and other things of that nature. You engineers, you're tricky.
Chuck E. Cheese should have had better security on some of their port mechanisms, or at least had better screwdriver bolts.
Exactly.
All right, this takes us to chip designing. So tell us about the C1 and the inspiration for that.
Okay, so after the computer stores, I've always liked electronics, so I wanted to get into electronics. And during the computer store days, I had the opportunity to get some tools that at the time were kind of, expensive, that I could do circuit simulation and do chip simulation with these FPGA chips. These are field programmable gate arrays. And just like racing cars and just like opening the computer stores, I started telling people, like, I'm going to get into doing chip design. And everyone said, well, you've got to go to school for that. Like, I don't think so. I think I could probably learn faster if I just do it myself. So what I did was I made a circuit board with these tools, and I put one of these chips on it. And I started, I knew if I wanted to get a job, I had to prove that I could do this stuff. So I started making chip simulations of video generation, of sound generation, input, output, all these different blocks that you would use in a system. And partway through, I decided, like, well, I had a Commodore 64 when I was a kid, and I loved that computer. Why don't I just take all these pieces and make a C64 on a single chip, which this FPGA chip was big enough that it could do that at the time and emulate it. So I took this design, and I would start going down to Silicon Valley, which I lived in Portland, Oregon at the time.
That's a
and
hike.
yeah, I started off, I still had enough money that I could start flying down there, and I'd go to these chip design and embedded systems conferences, and then I would sneak in, and then I would try to find the most powerful person at each booth and like try to schmooze them. I'd like go past all the booth bunnies and stuff, and like,
how do you sneak into a con? Now I need to know.
Oh, well, hey, wait, I can tell you how to get into PAX.
See, if I knew what the badges looked like, if they looked the same from year to year, I could definitely make a fake badge for PAX. But they're smart like that. They change these things. See?
The comments of the comments of Genesee and Jeri Ellsworth do not reflect the great podcast or the
I'm sorry,
podcast.
No one heard that.
Yeah, do remind me of the PAX story. It's relevant and funny. Hopefully I'll be able to get into PAX with legitimately this year. But
Yes.
anyway,
I'm sure
back
you
to the
will.
story. So these conferences are expensive. People that go to these conferences usually pay to get in there, and their company pays for them. So I would sneak in. It's pretty easy. You just walk towards the door with conviction, like you own the place. and make no eye contact. And if you hear the security guard say, "Miss, miss," you just keep going and you just lose them in the
crowd.
And if that doesn't work, if they catch you, I mean, the security people are the least motivated people. You know, they're bored. They're not going to chase after you. If that doesn't work, then you just go in a side door. You just wait for someone to go in a side door. But I would go down there and I would try to find the people of power in these different booths, and then like get them, pull them off to the side, and like, you really need to see my board. And I pull this thing out, and like, all right, this is what I've done. It's got all these different blocks in here, and if you ever need any of these things, just call me. And I'd have business cards, just handing them out like crazy. And eventually I started getting little jobs, and people really took advantage of me. I mean, I was working for like $12 an hour or something, like less than, you know, working as a welder or something I could just go do because I had experience. But eventually I started getting a reputation of doing a really good job. Oh, maybe I should go back to the Greyhound buses. It didn't happen so easily. I had to, eventually I was taking Greyhound buses and didn't have enough money to get a motel. I would go to the conference and then get back on a Greyhound and drive all the way back to Portland. But yeah, I got a reputation of doing a good job and started making more money. And then eventually what really busted my career wide open was, since I'd done this Commodore 64 and it was on the web, a toy company approached me to make a toy based on the Commodore 64, which was this old 8-bit computer that had really good games back in the 80s.
Remember.
Yeah, and so they wanted to do 30 games in a little joystick that you just plugged directly into your TV and ran off batteries. And I'd never done a full product design before at that point. I'd only done really small things for all these other startups and stuff. And
this
so
is
said,
hugely ambitious because, I mean, the amount of units you're shipping. Yeah. Wow.
So they asked if I could
sleep?
do it, and I just took a big gulp, and I'm like, no problem. And so not knowing anything about how to like do a chip from the ground up by myself, I just started doing it, and I would talk to the chip manufacturers, and I'd have to pretend that I knew all the lingo, and it was tricky, but I got it done in like a ridiculous short amount of time. I think it was 5 to 6 months total turn on the entire chip. So I shrunk the entire 64 down to a chip, worked with some software folks that ported all these games over to work with little nuances of my chip. And
now I read about this, and I want to stop you for a second. Is it that the technology has advanced so much from the time the Commodore 64 was made to when the computer chips that you were manufacturing were out, and you were able to reduce this? Or is it something I need to understand? Because everyone seems to think this is like an amazing, dumb this down for me, this amazing feat, taking the entire 64 into a chip.
Well, at that point, so back in the 80s, the size of the transistors were quite large because they hadn't refined the process as far as they had in 2003, 2, or whenever I started doing that project. 3, I guess, I did that project. So the transistors got smaller, so you could put more stuff on a single chip of a certain size.
Okay.
So I had actually stumbled onto a sweet spot, just pure luck, that the transistors had shrunk to the size that a little 99-cent chip could do everything that a Commodore 64, which cost $800 or whatever,
wow,
and had 50 chips in it back in 1983. So yeah, that's kind of how it scaled.
Okay.
Right now, you know, if I were to do something else, I could probably put like a Sega Genesis or something today because everything shrunk more.
Oh, amazing. Okay,
Could
continue with your train of thought. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Tinsy, and what?
Just as for your own personal opinion, as a developer and designer for these game systems, have you played at all with any of the Raspberry micro PCs or followed the Ouya Kickstarter project? And if so, do you have any thoughts on this next generation of people coming through doing development work for microization of?
I think it's pretty cool that people can take commodity parts that, you know, the Raspberry Pi and the Ouya, however you pronounce it, are pretty much just kind of low-end ARM-based cell phone chips that they plop down on a board, and they can get them really cheap. So opens them wide open for these indie game developers to make games on this little console. I think that's cool, and I think it partly fills in the gap of, like, when I was a kid, it was Apple IIs and Commodore 64s. That's where all of us nerds went to write our games. So we did it in BASIC, and now the same, like, 15-year-olds or whatever are going to be doing that on Raspberry Pis, and
they sound so delicious too. They're all naming them by food.
So it's pretty exciting. All of them have really big, ambitious goals, and I just don't know if it's gonna. I don't think it's gonna displace Xbox or anything like that. Just tremendous resources are behind Xbox, and these other things are always going to have to be like a generation or two behind in tech. So
take me back to
the C64 thing. It was really rough. I made a lot of leaps of faith. I was scared the entire time. We had chips made, and we were so behind schedule. I didn't know even how to quote how long it was going to take, because I'd never done it before. And so we were a bit behind schedule. We actually had to manufacture 250,000 chips at 99 cents each. That's a lot of money. And untested. It was the only thing it had been tested on is my little emulator board that I'd made for the software guys. And then it worked on the emulator board. So we had the chip made, and then it went to China, and the factory started mounting these chips on boards, and they didn't work. And these toy guys, these guys are the most intense New Yorkers you'll ever meet. They're like, "You're gonna ruin me if you don't fix this. You're getting on a you're getting on a plane. You're going over there.
There'll be a guy named Tony. He's gonna show up at your apartment at 9. Better get on the plane."
I have to admit, I had considered, like, well, maybe I can just take the money from this and run to, like, Mexico and get off the bed. I mean, I was scared because these chips didn't work. It was, $250,000 worth of money that I spent just because I'm some stupid kid that thinks that she could do a chip. And so I went to China and went over there, and we opened up the toy, and I looked at the board, the circuit board, and they had changed the circuit board from what I'd sent to them. They'd cost reduced it without telling me. Well, that's kind of weird. And so I started putting my finger on the board, which is the kind of the debugging tool the electrical engineers use, is to add capacitance and short things out with your fingers. And sometimes things good happen. You can infer what's going on. And all of a sudden the thing booted up. I saw the Commodore 64 screen, and I'm like, oh, thank God, thank God. And
now, had they made all of the product at that point, and they made it with the downsized bits and had to redo it, or what happened?
So they always do a pilot run. So you get your first silicon back, and then the production line has been being built up to that point. So there's plastic tooling, there's circuit board tooling, there's the assembly line with all the ladies that sit there and solder the thing together and put it into the case. So this was just their initial 100 units. So they squirted out 100 units or something that were defective. And
so that's their loss for being cheap.
Yeah, I could go on and on about, like, all the different. I got into doing toy design after this for quite a while, and there's lots of problems with manufacturing in China, and they try to cut corners and replace parts and stuff like that if you don't watch them like a hawk.
Well, I want to know what the annoying howling toy is, because your Wikipedia just says there was an annoying howling toy. It doesn't even call it by name. What is the howling toy?
There's a couple toys that I designed, or I prototyped at least, that I thought were pretty magical. And Howling Hounds was our code name for it, which I thought was really cool. So the concept was that the toy would be a little dog that had a certain amount of animation, like its head could bob or its ears could move around. And it would have built-in songs that it could sing. And it would have either a radio transmitter or an infrared transmitter that could transmit the notes that dogs could accompany it with. So each dog had a unique voice, you might say, unique tonality to it. And then whichever one was the master would transmit the notes, and then they would sing. And we were going to have these gameplay stuff where you would tap the dogs in rhythm and do stuff. And so we prototyped it up, and we had some plastics made, prototypes